Hey guys, what's going on? It's Meshi with Meshi TV. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me in this video. So today I thought that we would share and I would give you guys a brief update of how yoga teacher training is going, because a lot has changed for me in the process, and maybe you are someone who's either thinking about getting started with yoga teacher training but you're a little bit nervous of what to expect, or you've been practicing yoga for a while, but somewhere there's sort of a disconnect. So I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of an update of what has changed within my own practice in the last 2 months that has made a tremendous difference and shifted me over to almost like to the flip side. So I thought that I would just chat with you briefly about what has changed with yoga teacher training. So without further ado, why don't we just dive right into it? And before we do, of course, if you are brand new here, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you so much for taking the time to share your time and your space with me. And consider subscribing if you haven't already, obviously, because we chat here a few times a week. And a lot of the times we talk about planning and how we can really carve out how to live a more consciously driven life. We talk about spiritual practices and why that's important, and we dive into the entire lifestyle of what really makes up overall conscious living. So if that sounds good, then I think you're going to really like it here. Okay, why don't we just dive right in? So the big thing that has shifted, so obviously my training has, if you have been following me for a while, you would know that I have started yoga teacher training in September of last year, of 2019. And at first, it was just one of those things that would require me to just show up for a weekly practice. And then there was some homework here and there. But in the last about month or so, like right around January, I've gotten a lot more serious about my practices, and I've gotten a lot more serious about what I wanted to get out of each of my practices and why that was important. Primarily, I have to say, my main motivation was simply just to finish the hours, because there's certain hours that are required that you have to practice, and then there's certain hours that are required that you have to teach. So knowing that I will likely change my mind about just wanting to just constantly just commit to yoga only. To me, that's a big commitment, because I have many different interests, especially as we move into the spring and summer. I wanted to have that freedom for me to kind of move around, and if you wanted to run, then I can run. If I wanted to weight training, I can definitely include that and incorporate that into my wellness routine. But before I could even get to that space, I was fighting mentally and resisting so much the thing that would just require me to consistently show up. And like the key word here is absolutely consistency. Because I thought that you just have to have really strong practices. You need to have, a strong Ashtanga practice. If those of you that are not familiar, Ashtanga is sort of like Hatha yoga, but it's just a lot more structured, and it becomes a lot more vigorous because you have a flow that's sort of built in with each transition as you move into a next posture or into a next sequence. So that's sort of where it becomes by about an hour in, you're kind of thinking, okay, we're done, right? But you're actually still not done. You're just moving on to the floor sequence. So those of you that are familiar, you probably already know this. I'm not telling you anything new. But so like what really has shifted? Well, I think what has shifted the most for me is the consistency of me showing up regularly to practice. And I stopped questioning it. And I stopped questioning it because honestly, I was just committed to finishing the hours by the end of February. I didn't completely finish my hours by the end of February. I'm about 2 hours shy. So I think that I've achieved my goal. But what's more is that when I released that expectation of me having to finish my hours, or when you set those big goals, I don't know if you're driven by your goals. I'm definitely driven by time-specific goals, because then I feel like there's a sense of urgency for me to show up and stop overthinking it. Basically, the two things that have changed is I stopped overthinking whether I should go or not. And that question shifted to where should I go instead of should I go. Me giving myself the option of showing up to practice or not showing up was definitely a game changer. And the other thing that has shifted is just seeing sort of that end result for me to show up to classes that I was really resisting because it was a lot harder. I don't know if you've done this before, where you kind of look at the yoga studio or the gym close to you, you look at their entire schedule, and then you're sort of running like this tally inside your head of what kind of practice will that person run? Is that a hard one, or is that like a moderate one? How exhausted will I be by the end of it? And can I actually function afterwards if I show up to their class? Well, that's how my brain works. Sometimes I'm not necessarily looking at what time those classes start at, but more how much energy that will drain off from me in order for me to show up to the class. Obviously, with hot practices, it takes a lot more energy out of me than a normal practice, like a normal temperature practice. But when I stopped overthinking it and I just made the commitment to just go and show up, then something shifted. And what shifted is just that resistance has gone away, and that internal little monkey mind has quieted down. Especially, it takes me for about 20 minutes until that happens. But I've also gotten a lot stronger, so I don't resist the harder practices nearly as much. And I actually notice at the end of the week, if I've taken 2 days off or 3, then by the 3rd day, I'm getting really agitated and I feel the need to move. But even if I don't keep that strong of a consistent, regular practice, I'm noticing that during the day as well, that if I've sat in front of a computer for far too long, then my body starts resisting me. And I have that little voice inside my head that says, you should go and maybe stretch out on your mat. And when you get to that space, and maybe that will happen with you as well, but when you get to that space where you're getting hints of inspiration or ideas that you should actually go and just stretch out, that's when you know that you have conquered your own resistance to movement, because the payoff is just much greater. Now, what can you expect in yoga teacher training? That's a whole other bag of potatoes. I'm not going to get into that because it honestly just depends on your personal circumstances, the duration of your training, where you're training, how often you have to show up, and what that expectation is, and also what your personal background is. Because if you have an anatomy background, you will probably find that yoga teacher training is going to be a little bit easier and more of a refresher in a lot of ways, rather than something brand new that you need to take on. Whereas if you have experience within the yoga community, then probably a lot of the yogic philosophies will come a lot easier to you, but maybe you will find that you're going to struggle with the movement, the kinesiology, the anatomy of just understanding muscles, and like the physiology of how the body functions if you don't have experience learning that. So those are my big things that have shifted. I would love to hear from you guys. If you are going through yoga teacher training, let me know how it's going. I would love to at least cheer you on, as we're still very much in the thick of it. There's still about 3 or 4 months left, and I'm hoping to just be completed. And after that, I can actually start teaching close to me here in a local studio, but also online. So if you'd like to see at least a sample of a flow, comment below and let me know. But more importantly, let me know how your training is going, because I would love to cheer you guys on. And in the meanwhile, hopefully you have found this helpful, useful. And maybe in the next video, I will actually show you just a quick intro of how you can kind of get yourself out of your head and onto your mat a little bit easier. So stay tuned for that. And in the meanwhile, if you have enjoyed this video, you can give me a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And in the meanwhile, keep shining, you guys. You're just so much more powerful than you think. And I will see you again in my next video. Bye.